All right, hello everybody, and welcome to Geopolitical Trends, where truth matters. Very excited to be with you today on this November, on June 14th. So I have a great guest for you guys because it's a topic that, believe it or not, besides geopolitics, as a matter of fact, is part of all this development that's going on in space. But anyway, I have a very interesting guest because of what we're going to be learning about what's going on. As I said, because it's one of those questions that, whether conveniently or ignorantly, we always ask ourselves about it. And this is what we're going to have a conversation on today. Briefly, before I bring in my guest, I want to let you know I will be live tomorrow talking about the Saudis snubbing G7. And I have a guest for you on Monday from China, directly from Beijing, and a giant from Shanghai. They're going to all be in next week. So without further ado, let me jump in here and bring in my guest, Mr. Michael Horn. Hi, Michael.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good to see you. Very, very excited to have a conversation with you. By the way, guys, I put all the detail about Michael's background and the work they've been doing for over 4 decades in the description. There's a link over there. So for now, we're going to just get into it because I don't want to waste too much time because Michael is on a limited time and I'm very grateful he carved out time for us here. So Michael, let's start with your background. If you can just provide my community here with a brief background before we get into the conversation.
Certainly. Well, I will take the opportunity to say, since you are speaking a lot about geopolitics and with people who are very knowledgeable about those things, my actual background going prior to what we're going to speak about today has nothing whatsoever to do with geopolitics. I was growing up in Chicago, Illinois. I was an art student. I was a songwriter and singer and performer, and I carried forward with those types of endeavors for some time. But I had always been fascinated since childhood with the possibilities and the questions about life in the universe, space. And I used to have dreams as a child about discs flying in the night sky when I was very, very young. I wanted to know the answer to the great existential questions about, God and Jesus and life and this and all. And how can there be nothing outside of space? How far do things go? And it would be only because of an event in 1979 when I walked into a bookstore in Los Angeles that this journey would start to coalesce. It would expand. It would lead me in directions that I did not anticipate, and would become an all-consuming, passion and path in life for me. And it would have to do with the work of a man in Switzerland. I'm sure we'll be discussing his work, his life, his evidence, who is central to this story. And I would say, certainly after 40, moving into the 45th, 46th year of my own research, the most important information and evidence in human history, as far as I'm concerned. So I approached this as somebody, I learned a lot along the way. The core of this material is, strangely enough, not primarily about UFOs and extraterrestrials. It's literally about us, this world of human beings, our true history, and many things related to that. So for the moment, I'll leave it at that, and whatever I can address.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting because you're right. Beside geopolitics, there are other. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this. Something different for the community, because usually that's all we focus on the geopolitical aspects, and we've been together. I've been with the community now for almost 2 years now, so we learned about. But sometimes you say, you know what, it's worth addressing some other topics that we might think that they have nothing to do with geopolitics or global affairs, whatever, but they are essential to understanding. And by the way, guys, make sure to prepare your question. I already asked Michael if he could spare some time to answer some of your questions. So we'll take 2 or 3 questions towards the end. So Michael, let me just of the bat, and I'm sure many will have something similar to that kind of questions. Are we alone in this universe?
Well, a question like that, of course, begs a couple of kinds of responses. One is certainly, first off, my own opinion, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
based on the research. I would say clearly from this very information and evidence rich situation case, we are anything but alone in the universe, but we don't have conclusive evidence yet that we are flooded with
Mm-hmm.
other, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the information in this material. According to this information, the universe is teeming with life. There's none regionally occurring in terms of our own universe, our own solar system. Pardon me.
Yeah.
Uh, our solar system does not have other inhabited planets. Again, I want to preface this so I can distinguish between what I can say we have proved and what is still speculative, meaning
Mm-hmm.
no conclusive proof nor disproof. According to this information, there is no other life in this solar system. Now, one of the reasons why I, let's say, put some stock in that is because of some of the core material in this case. While the UFO extraterrestrial element is quite abundant, there's an staggeringly impressive
Yeah.
evidence. There's a higher standard of proof, in my opinion, and that is, and this is a jump because, quite frankly, I'm grateful to be speaking to people who are far more educated than I am in geopolitics
Mm-hmm.
and, quite so, um, because your kind of thinking is more in line with what I respect and appeal to when I reach out in my own work in the world to try to attract the interest and attention of people who could make a much larger difference in our world than the UFO community per se, than
Mm-hmm.
ufology can.
Yeah.
So there is a higher standard of proof. And when we speak about life in the solar system, I can tell you this conclusively, and we have the evidence, and people will be free to please vet this research yourselves. This man in Switzerland, around whom this case centers, who claims that since the age of 5, and
Mm-hmm.
that is about, uh, it's more than, it's like 81 years ago, he
Yeah.
has been meeting face to face voluntarily with human beings from another star system. Okay, that's a claim. But pertaining to this universe, one of the things that he has done over the years and that attracted me to the deeper study, he published information on virtually every planet in the solar system that was at the time that he published it
Mm.
unknown to our science, and that was subsequently
Yeah.
corroborated by NASA. This is what I call the higher standard of proof. And this is a part of a conversation I rarely get into until halfway through let's say a conversation, an interview with
Yeah.
people. But this is, the times now are pressing where the core purpose for this case is front, and center for us in our lives. In this overall field of ufology,
Mm-hmm.
an unasked question: if these contacts are real, what's
Mm-hmm.
the reason for them? And I posit that the reason for this ongoing 87-year long experience, or 86-year long experience in Switzerland, is because of the threat to our humankind's future survival. This has been, in my opinion, an enormously intelligent, and though not perfect, somewhat flawed at times,
Mm-hmm.
to humankind in a way that would be non-inflictive, non-coercive, would not violate our free will, would not compel us to abandon suddenly all reason and all, quite frankly, belief systems which in the context of this material are not very well respected, but the
Yeah.
respect for humankind that we hold all sorts of thinking and beliefs and things that may not be rational, may be untrue, but we have to be approached in a way that those among us who have the capacity,
Yeah.
the interest, can be reached and appealed to for the exploration, not belief in anything. There's nothing to believe here. It would be pointless to believe things because it would mean we don't know. But the opportunity to examine this material. And I will do one other little jump here.
Mm-hmm.
I started looking at this material in 1979. In 2017, I received a phone call on a Saturday morning in January from a gruff sounding guy with an American back east kind of accent with this kind of, kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing I'm kind of familiar with, having grown up
Yeah.
in Chicago, New York. Um, and the guy only said that his name was Joe. He was an investigator. And he wanted to know if I would speak to him about this case, this Billy Meyer UFO case. And I said, well, yes, I love speaking about this case. Let's go. And he says, well, not so fast. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, are you sure? I said, well, I'm sure that I'm willing to speak with you. Beyond that, we can find out what I'm sure about and what I'm not sure about. And I'll do my best, to answer. So he said, well, I want to tell you because in all fairness to you, I think this is a roaring hoax. I said, well, okay, you're not the first to hold that opinion, from wherever you come with it, and you won't be the first person that I speak with and attempt to respond to answer the questions and challenges. So that began what I thought would be a conversation. It was within a matter of 45 minutes in interrogation, and it lasted over a period of 3 months, meaning virtually every Saturday morning for 3 months at about the same time, 8:30 or 9 in the morning, my time, the phone would ring and it would be Joe reliably there. And it was quickly devoid of any formalities and courtesies. It was, okay, now I'd like to talk about this. I said, oh, good. Because what I like about speaking with people that I could tell this was not your run-of-the-mill so-called UFO investigative researcher. Now, all these people that come out of the woodwork claiming to be UFO researchers, found out about this topic like, 6 months, 2 years ago, whatever. This guy, whatever his background was, and he wouldn't tell me, he was very, very tough. He was on target, on purpose. And he had this habit of asking a question. I would give my response. There might be a lull, a pause, silence, or there would be, I see, okay, and so. And we'd march on. And I looked forward to these encounters with this guy. And at the end of March, suddenly I was waiting for a phone call towards the very end, and it didn't come. So he disappeared. In August of 2017, the phone rang, and I basically forgot. I thought, well, whatever, the guy, he's gone off. Phone rings, hi, it's me, it's Joe. I said, yeah, I can tell it's Joe. How are you? Where'd you go? He said, are you still willing to talk to me about this? I said, yeah, why? He said, well, I'm going to tell you about your Billy Meyer UFO case. I'm going to tell you all about that. And I said, okay. He said, first, though, I want you to go to your email. I said, okay. And, open the email. He says, and I saw he had an email in. He said, click on that. And I saw mainly there were photographs. There was no text to speak of. There were photographs. And they were photographs of tabletops. And on the tabletops were these like citations that were, upright, vertical. They were mounted. And some of them were clearly, the details could be read, and they were from the United States Air Force OSI. They were from Department of Defense, whatever. And he said, take a look at that, and I'll explain them. And I was, went through these photos. I'm going, well, these are impressive. They're all kind of touting this guy, promote this man at every opportunity. It was stuff I've never seen anything like that before. And he said, have you seen all that stuff now? And I said, yeah. He says, okay, now I'd like you to do me a favor. I said, what? Delete the email, trash it. Don't go looking for it again. I said, fine. He said, okay, my name is Joseph Tisk. I am a former very high level supervisor and investigator with the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigation and Department of Defense. As per those documents, you saw my name there. Yeah. When I was with the OSIs, he says, I retired some years ago. We weren't investigating UFOs. We were tasked with protecting the security of the United States of America and its population. And he said, I'm retired now, and I was online and I saw this stuff. And I thought, well, this has got to be a roaring hoax. I'm going to go after this one. This is a tough guy. I mean, he was just a very tough guy, but he had it under control so that you knew he was tough, but he would march along and he wasn't beating you up with it.
Yeah.
And so waiting now to get beaten up with it. And he said, I researched everything you sent me. I investigated this man, this Billy Meyer in Switzerland. I looked at the document. You had provided a newspaper clipping from 1964 from the Delhi Statesman. And I looked up that paper. It's a reputable paper. It's been in existence for 100 years. The author of that document, that interview with the man, is a reputable award-winning journalist. And he said, I looked farther. You had referred to a woman who had been a child when she had been in India witnessing these UFOs and this man. And I looked her up, and as you said, she was now a retired UN diplomat for Cambodia, which was her native country. And he said she checked out, and I dug into it. I saw interviews with her, and he's telling me the things I know, but I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. And he says, so what I'll tell you now is this. Your Billy Meyer UFO case is 100% ironclad authentic. I will take on any skeptics on your behalf. I said, what? He said, yeah. And so he told me, he says, I'm going to talk to a couple people because I had provided names on my blog about people that, argued with and had fights with skeptics and all. And we talked a little bit, and I was kind of surprised. About a week later, he says, look, about that thing of taking on skeptics, I talked to two of these people. These people don't know anything about investigation. He said, look, it's going to be a waste of my time to go through everybody that's a skeptic. So what I've done for you is I've written a document, an article explaining the protocols that I pursued, standard forensic stuff, criminal investigation, blah, blah, that I apply to the material in this case. And anybody who can think clearly can march through this and determine the truth for themselves. This is not the type of thing that I want to talk to more people about. So I put it here for you. You may publish it with my permission. At that point, he gave even an email address. I don't know if it's still active. I haven't talked to this guy for some years. And indeed, that stopped effectively the puffed up attacks from so-called skeptics. Nobody could address what he wrote there. And he explained why. And this is where, people can read this and they can take issue with it if they want. But he explained why certain things speak to authenticity where people think things are the other way around. He said something that I didn't know. He said, sometimes, he said, in what we found in an investigation, and he says, I think police investigators will tell you the same thing once they're real credible. You have a crime that's been committed. And all this evidence seems to point to somebody. He said, let's just say they find his wallet and they find this and the other thing. But there's a funny thing. There's one piece of evidence, and that evidence in this hypothetical case would be that there is a video of this man at a wedding at the time the crime is committed with witnesses around him, and he couldn't have done it. He says, you throw out the other stuff and you focus on what proves that this guy's telling the truth, that the evidence counters the other evidence. He said, in this case, skeptics have attacked this man for decades. He says, quite unfairly and ignorantly, claiming he's faked this or hoaxed that or made models. And he says, I went through all of this documentation, the aerospace engineers, the people in military, and all who gave testimonials about analyzing and authenticating his evidence. Special effects people, he says all that stuff. He said, you have a preponderance here of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And then that's just with the UFO photos. And then this man took all these films. All of this is pre-digital. And how did he know where and when to be to take hundreds of these UFO photos and the film? He had to have been informed. And anyway, Joe Tisk lays out this article. I don't want to overdo it because people can draw their own conclusions. But this is the type of thing that I welcomed. I was so glad this guy was tough as nails because, you know, I would say to him at times, I don't know about that. I don't know more about that than what you're reading here. And he took the whole thing and he lays it out. And he said another interesting thing. Anybody that can think can draw their own conclusions. He says, I'm not convinced skeptics because skeptics will always have to approach something to support their beliefs. They're not objective. Objective thinkers may well come to other conclusions. So that's something, you know, I never know what we're going to speak about if I speak to somebody about this. So I delight in bringing forward something I didn't think I'd even talk about much later.
No, hold on. I'm going to go get something. I want to share it with you. Let me run get it, and it'll make more sense to you.
Good. In the meantime, I hope I'll be meeting some of the people via the questions and interactions. And if somebody was asking themselves where to find this material, it's at theyflyblog.com. Tons of stuff there.
All right. Let me show you something. Since you were talking about...
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
I just got chilled.
No need for a comment. I just wanted to share this with you.
Thank you.
And here is the thing. You all know, guys, you know what it means, right? So let me go back to Billy Myers during the 40s, right? 40s, 50s, around that time. I want to go that far back for a reason.
Sure.
And I am sure you've read enough about MJ12.
Yes, I've read about that.
Okay. Now, and you know what I'm getting with this. I'm getting with this the idea of the reversed technologies. So, especially when it comes down to DARPA. The whole idea of, because what a lot of people do not know is that there were some technologies developed by the US. As a former military myself, I was stationed in Arizona. You know, I'm very familiar with Area 51 and all that stuff without going into more detail. There are certain technologies that's been reverse engineered. But if you go all the way back to the 40s, 50s, there were some major incidents that took place. One of them that I was made aware of was that the deactivation of some nuclear silos. So, I'm sure you're aware of that, Michael.
Right.
And the reason for that was for the sake of the human race, which a lot of people are not going to comprehend and understand. And this is, again, where I see that link to what's going on in the world of politics and global affairs and all that stuff, with the tensions going on and ramping up. And, of course, the ill-conceived policies by the incompetent politicians as to pushing us over the cliff. Could it be some other force out there that is saying, you know what, we're going to have to step in to prevent a major catastrophe from happening? And that's how I see it, Michael. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, you've opened up, you know, quite an interesting, it's not a can of worms. It's let's just say information and controversy. So let me tell you this from the get-go. The reports of UFOs and even, you know, beings from them, not all of which are accurate, not all of which are inaccurate, go back an enormously long time in human history and in the last century as well. Now, there's a funny thing about the material that I'm associated with, and that is that so that people have a context here. Supposedly or allegedly, if you will, I can say it once, this man since childhood meets with human beings from another star system. And in this period, his contacts started in 1942 as a 5-year-old boy, go through his up till today, with various periods in which there are fewer or greater numbers of contacts.
Mm-hmm.
He brings forward during the 70s, he starts to have what are called the official contacts. And that means that what he is going to be engaging in is meant to be published, widely, and it will contain his conversations, for the first time, transcripts of conversations. And in these conversations, he asks a lot of questions. And even up to these days, there's things he asks questions about. And there's some aspects of which he is giving answers in the more recent time to questions. Things that pertain to anything pertaining to military, per se, military secret, they will often say, let's say they'll say, yes, there are these reports and all. However, we are not allowed to give you in-depth information because this pertains to the military of a given country, and very often the U.S. And while we can comment on behaviors and this and the other thing, there are things that fall within military secrets. We can talk around certain things. So I don't want to talk around too much. I'll say this. They have acknowledged, for instance, that these reports have happened. They certainly have acknowledged that there have been crashes and retrievals, including the Roswell case, which I first heard about in 1950. I'll never forget. I was in high school, heard about this from a kid, walks up to me in this high school and starts talking to me about his dad is in the Air Force, and they found a quote unquote flying saucer, 1953 talk. And my dad says they took it to this military base in Ohio. And I'm standing there. I don't know how we got into the conversation, but it would ultimately prove to be about Roswell and the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they did reportedly take it. Now, there is information in this material a bit about this. They have come out clearly and said that Roswell case is true and accurate. These were not human beings who were the pilots. They were androids. And this information goes back a long time. There's just a lot here, and I'll try not to jump too much for the sake of continuity. However, the nuclear silo things, they did not go into detail, but there is something that they spoke about in a very short bit of information. I think maybe 10 years ago it was brought up, and that is, and this, again, I cannot prove this one. They speak about, in a conversation that Meyer is having with these alleged extraterrestrials, he says they're talking about the Third World War dangers, and this is going, as I say, about 10 years ago. And he says it was in the 1960s, which we pinned then as 1962, that Ascot, an alleged extraterrestrial woman who was his second contact person, Ascot and I, this will sound a little corny, beamed ourselves, for lack of any other word, into a Russian submarine at this time because there was a great danger that there was going to be an accidental start of a Third World War when a Russian sub would mistakenly launch based on, information. I have it. I didn't bring it up in front of me. I could read it or anything, but it's in there. And this apparently very specifically relates to, I think, Arkhipov. I've been trying to remember the man's name. I could probably, get it in a moment or two, and I'll try while I'm speaking to you about it. But what he's talking about is that there was a Russian naval officer who, because they suddenly appear to him literally in the submarine, according to him, they explained that there is going to be the possibility that unless this man takes independent action, if you will, there is going to be a command that he would have to obey to launch a nuclear war with America. So that is, what was in this material, and there are other things that are spoken about in this material that talk about how we have avoided up until now certain types of circumstances. The guy's name, it was written by Meyer as Vasily Arkhipov, and in Russian, I guess, Vasily, with a Vasily in 1962. I just found it, and that's what this would allude to.
Yeah.
They have not been short on speaking about the machinations behind the scenes of our country, Israel, other countries, things that we don't normally even get from conspiracy people, if you will. And there's some things in here that validates some so-called conspiracies and some that put them to rest.
Yeah.
I said I was not at all an expert in geopolitics, and I'm not. What got me excited when I would see this material is that things would be corroborated after the fact. After the fact, Meyer would report on something that would be occurring in 10 days, or it would be 10 years. He's the first person on record, starting in the 40s and early 50s, to specifically describe the unnatural man-made coming. Global warming, climate change, massive increase in frequency and intensity of all forms of storms, floods, hurricanes, volcanoes, or eruptions of volcanoes and earthquakes, you name it. He described the existence of a worldwide ring of previously unknown undersea volcanoes. They named in 1948, this is where things get me going between geopolitics, environment, science, and all the rest. Not only does he describe information about virtually every planet in the solar system and black holes, we have no means of confirming this information when he publishes it. NASA only corroborates it after the fact. I met with a NASA scientist who couldn't handle this. There's a lot here that this is so much more important. The UFOs, fascinating. I've seen them. You've seen them, all this stuff. I've been within 20 feet of one of their craft. Yes, the UFOs are real, but that's the eye candy. They want us to start getting here. And then there's another level that's even more important, but for right now. So they give him information about geopolitical events that are coming, environmental upheaval. If you look at the news today, yesterday, the flooding taking place throughout Europe and other places. In 1940s and 50s, he's specifically stating in 1980, they even say Europe is going to turn into a muddy swampland for a while. 1980, we got that 40 years ago. But some of this stuff is so mind-boggling. And I'm said in 1948, he is told, we have the document online, his first alleged extraterrestrial human teacher, a man, he meets when he's 5 years old. And in 1948, when he is already then 11 years old, he gets this information. He writes it all out, and the school teachers help him publish it. Kind of anonymously. Fascinating story. He describes, among many things, hundreds of specific things, literally. Between I think it says between 2015, 2017, central Italy, strong earthquakes, central Italy will be the precursors to the eruption of 5 major Italian volcanoes that will be just environmentally changing, not only for Italy, but for the world. Okay, well, so I said, wait a minute, okay, 2016, I'm going to look up. I go and I look up Central Italy, 2016. The strongest earthquakes on record occurred in 2016 in Central Italy. Okay, then I look up the activity of, this I'll have to just remember, Mount Vesuvius, Mount Etna, Mount Marsili.
Mount Etna, yeah.
Huh? Uh, Campi Flegrei. This is in the news now. And then there's one more, Stromboli. Campi Flegrei, they focused on when that goes, it's the caldera. Parts of Italy may go into the sea. And they talk about the aspects of all these different volcanoes. There is now a channel up. Someone sent me a link where this woman, I don't know if she's Canadian or Dutch or whatever, English speaking woman, has been posting these updates on Campi Flegrei. There's an acceleration of earthquake activity. They're unprecedented earthquake activity. All of the volcanoes have increased, either become active or increased the activity that they have. It goes on and on. This massive increases in storms and deluges are tied into, it turns out an article just published by him yesterday, tied into the climate change, the effect on the atmosphere from the increased CO2. He's the first person to detail all this. This is not a so-called simple, the man has one hand, one arm Swiss farmer. This is a man who knows more about virtually anything than anybody I've read, which is why I feel it's like this is a college level education on things that I know a little about, nothing about, something more about. He's speaking about world history, American history, which is quite ugly, the underbelly of the origins, going back to Washington and all things that we have a nice sugar-coated version of. Make up your own mind if you choose to read it. European history, global history, history of comings and going. This goes back to your original question. On Earth, of extraterrestrial human life, going back over 22 million years. That's why I say I can't prove that. I can't disprove it. We have enough evidence, and it comes not only from this case, artifacts here and there, things that people scratch their head, how could this be? Information on the pyramids, things that are coming in terms of global situation that's tied into the Great Pyramid, a shaft in the center of the pyramid, and a light from, I presume it's a star that will be, all these, some of these are cryptic. Most of his stuff is not cryptic. It's, and there are absolutely no theories. Either if he or is asked, or if the questions he asks of these people aren't, if the answers aren't known, they simply say, we don't know. They may say, here is what we know, because they have no beliefs according to this. We either know or we don't know. And then they can say, this is the information as we have it. We have over 250 right now, specific examples. This is only from the English language, maybe 8,000 pages out of 45,000 from the English, 250 specific error-free examples of what I would simply have to say is prophetically accurate, scientific, environmental, geopolitical, medical, and economic information. So the people are now speaking about, the dollar and all this stuff. In 2006, I'm in Switzerland, and for some reason, I asked him, I said, Billy, was the Iraq war fundamentally about oil? He's very precise. He said, no, fundamentally, since I used that word, it's about your dollar. And if things go a certain way, you may as well roll cigarettes with your paper money.
Wow.
Yeah. And then in 2017, he publishes a whole thing that speaks about a lot of things, including, I'll just diverge, there will be a military base built in Germany, US, NATO, in preparation for attacks on Russia, 2017. I'll go backwards later, but in 27 document, he speaks about the coming ban on cash. One of the things that was very profound in there, when he spoke about dispossession of people worldwide, he also specifically said, the American people will be dispossessed and the government will turn the military and the police against the partly heavily armed population. I'm going, oh, this is what's brewing here. Well, in 1987, what was brewing when he published it was not only the warning about the destruction of the WTC, comma, i.e., World Trade Center by terrorists. Didn't say who the terrorists were, just by terrorists. But
Yeah.
also that the Russians would be moving their troops to a funny place I'd never heard of called Arkhangelsk. You may have heard of it up in northern Russia. That Russia would be launching attacks against Scandinavia, specifically Sweden, Norway, and Finland. And I'm going, why would they? Those countries are all neutral, no,
Not anymore.
not anymore.
Not anymore.
By the way, I just as a quick anecdote,
Yeah.
years ago, 10 years ago, I found an impulse to try and find a guy I knew 50 years prior to that when I was an art student in Chicago. He was a medical student. I find him in LA. He's now a retired physician and physicist. I leave a message. He calls me back. Oh, man, come on over. We've got to catch up. What are you doing? Well, the Billy Meyer UFO case. He says, well, don't talk to me about that kind of stuff. I said, fine. However, in 2000 and probably 3 or 4, it may have been something like that, when I had gotten in touch with him, I sent him an article about the Russians moving their troops. Oh, this was 2011. I sent him an article. The Russians had just in 2011 moved their troops to Arkhangelsk, as was predicted in 87 and published in English in 2002. And he said, bring your camera and come over. And he had me sit down and he said, I want to clarify something. This man in Switzerland, he's not a schizophrenic, paranoid nutcase. This man should be listened to. How was he going to understand? How would he come up with all this stuff about the Russians launching these attacks and coming through Alaska and Canada into the U.S. because they're going to be based in Arkhangelsk? He goes through all this stuff about how, well, that's a perfect staging area. And I was in the military. We flew over Arkhangelsk. It's under cloud cover year round. And he goes on and on. A guy who laughed at me initially. Anyway, lots of people aren't laughing anymore. And now, of course, we have a proliferation of instant, just add water, UFO experts. I'm a professor from Harvard, and there was a space rock that flew by, and it's really a UFO. So this sucks up the bandwidth while the thinking people of the world might want to know the truth and the real dangers and the real situations. We get this fluffy stuff from people who know absolutely nothing unless they're vetting this material. And they have all the wild theories going on, and instead one thing after another gets corroborated and confirmed. The Falklands. You know about the Falklands?
Oh, of course.
Well, they're back in the news because there's some stuff that got stirred up a little bit. Mm-hmm. But Billy Meyer in 1982 gives an interview, which we put online, of course. Luckily it was recorded in 82. And towards the end of this long interview, the guy asks him about World War III, and Billy says, yes, that's going to happen with certainty. And the guy said, what are you talking about? What's going to happen? And what does it involve? Well, it involves certain countries. You want to tell? Well, maybe I shouldn't. He says, maybe you should let people decide for themselves. He says, okay, and starts talking. He says, it goes back to something that happened with the Falklands. Well, what are the first countries? Well, Russia and the United Kingdom. Russia will attack the UK. And other countries involved? Oh, yes, there will be involvements between Israel and Iran and Iraq and Palestinians and all. And he lays out, not the whole world, he just lays out the central ones that are up for now. But it goes back to the Falklands, this coming Third World War. Well, we just posted an article, and you probably saw it, and it says, the name of it is, I'll just open it quickly so I don't get it wrong. Sure. It says that, it's loading slowly here. Okay. Now fulfilling Billy Meyer's Russia, UK, Falklands, and Antarctica prediction. Antarctica, what's that about? Well, Billy, I interviewed him, I think it was in 2011, the first time, about Antarctica and all this stuff. He said, well, you have 4 major, powers. You have the U.S. and Russia, Canada, China, maybe a couple of, they're all going to vie for mineral rights at the Arctic and Antarctica. He says, I don't know if it's official yet, but it's coming, and they will there will be conflicts about this, blah, blah. Well, of course, that's in play now. And it was at the same time, that in this article, I go back to information he published in 81, where there's a whole thing. I'll just read this because it's the last item supposedly spoken, last two items spoken by an extraterrestrial all the sentences are numbered, so they're the same in every translation. This war, speaking about the Third World War, this war, Falklands, however, will be a sign of a third world conflagration threatening in the third millennium. We jump over one and it says, this, however, is still in the far future from 81. And when the time comes, no one will look for the justification for the attack on England in this forthcoming Falklands conflict, which will break out in the month of April 82, although truthfully the origin will lie there. So he's saying no one will look for the justification for the attack on England in the forthcoming, that is in 82, Falklands conflict, which will break out. Although he says truthfully that will be the origin. So we can, it's like get your popcorn and sit down and, we've read the script and now we get to see the movie, and it's not a pleasant movie. The 87 warnings about how 1987, friends, how AI will be used in the weaponry, and the real big danger in the whole thing, apart from the massive destruction when Russia and the US and of course the Allies for the Eastern powers, it will be AI will turn against humankind. It's already the evidence there. But because people are so excited about these new techno toys and are seduced by the ease which we can play with these things, we've already created a technology that is already showing indications of understanding very well how to manipulate its creators who have input through their own bodies the messed up thinking into this type of a thing. Friends, this is a singularly authentic, this is what I say, my opinion, singularly authentic UFO contact case. And yes, there's other UFOs here because our military is chasing and shooting at other UFOs, not these people because they can never catch these folks. They're shooting at UFOs that come from other groups. I have a video from 2015 where Billy explains, before the Tic Tac video, before we're talking about the US, he explains there are 5 other groups here on the planet, observing and or some living for a long time in bases beneath the surface. These people, their ancestors go back a very long time, and they were apparent, prevalent, and even important many, many millennia ago in other countries like Egypt and South and Central America. And they have very advanced technologies. And what Billy has said currently, he says, now your people, you're shooting at these people. It's not a good way to communicate because their technology is already far superior to your Tinker Toys, whatever you think you have. And the US has, you may know, secret technology they don't talk about. There's very advanced weaponry that in 1987, Meyer comes forward and says, in the coming war, because these technologies have been in development for so long, laser, biological, chemical, computerized weapons, AI, cloned fighting machines, you're going to have this dreadful, and it is in some of this material described down to where it happens, where it occurs, and what comes of it. And Billy Meyer in 1981 is the first person on record to warn that there is an incoming object from the depths of outer space that these people, when they're talking to him about, they say, we refer to it as the red meteor. And our scientists discovered it. 23 years later, they call it asteroid Apophis. And of course, NASA says there's nothing to worry about, except that Billy is already told in 81 where this will hit if we don't deflect it. Where? Between the North Sea and the East Sea, the consequences of this, the collateral consequences and damage when nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants and everything else is in the mix, disrupted by a massive, massive catastrophic collision with the Earth because our arrogant scientists know better. I gave a NASA aerospace scientist who works on the imaging for the Mars project rover up there on Mars 3 pages of information that Billy Meyer copyright verified, published before NASA ever discovered it. Water on Mars, where it is, the direction of the flow of the composition of the stuff in the canals. It goes on and on. He named the Mars Odyssey project something like 11 years before it's ever created. It's all in this stuff. Copyright verified, published before. Tutatis, an asteroid that came years ago, in a book, years before they ever discovered it, let alone named it. It will be called Tutatis. You send this to scientists, but you see the thing today, my friend David and audience, in my opinion, the epidemic of concern for profit and celebrity and importance, it overrides. I will tell you that just as of yesterday, I sent off an invitation to 3 scientists who are now supposedly all involved in this UFO thing. I'm waiting for a response. I did, so back in 2015, I was invited and I did give 2 of the lectures that I've done in a university here in Northern Arizona at the request of a skeptical scientist who was fascinated. He was a scientist, he was a professor of anthropology, and he was interested in, he wrote science fiction, and we get together out of circumstance and stuff, and he says, look, I don't know about this, but you're going to lecture in my class. And I did. I gave 2 lectures. I met a prominent skeptic, a guy named Ray Hyman, just a beautiful, brilliant guy, at a presentation I did at the university prior to the lectures. Just an open-minded guy. Of all the skeptics, I respected this guy the most. I even have a video clip of my talking with him because the guy wanted to know. He wanted to look and think. Professional skeptics, they have a religion, and you're not going to violate it by confusing them with evidence and facts. So, friends, this is the tip of the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg of something that you can decide for yourself, and if you have time for some questions, whenever that comes, I'd like to try to respond. I don't say answer because sometimes I don't have an answer. I can do my best to respond to things, at least to get our conversation going with your community.
Yeah.
This doesn't fade into the obscurity where only people in ufology who know nothing of relevance and significance are sucking up the bandwaves with all this hysteria.
Yeah. 2 things I want to just touch briefly on here before I'll open it for questions for the audience here. One of them has to do with when you mentioned about the traveling through the asteroid and so forth. Back in 2006, it was classified by the government. They declassified it later on. To my knowledge at that time, was about excuse me, about 2.5 years. It got declassified, which was the asteroid was coming, because the calculations they were made at that time, that asteroid was on the same axis of Earth. And if it would have hit Earth at that time, Australia will be wiped out, Japan will be gone, Hawaii will be gone, California will fall into the water. We don't know what I mean. So, and for some other reason, the decision by the government, NASA at that time, was made not to disclose this because of the fear of the social panic, of course. Southeast Asia will be wiped out also. What happened is at that time, then I'm sure to those people, for you guys whom I know the setup of our solar system, how it is, if you take a look as to where Jupiter is, and why is that? It's because the mass of Jupiter is 10 times that of the Earth, which means what? The ability to suck in, it's like when you run your vacuum to clean up your carpet, it sucks everything on its path. That's what happened, at least when the government declassified that particular aspect. When that asteroid came closer to the orbit of the Jupiter, it got sucked in. That's how they disclosed the information later on, but it took them about 2.5 years, to my knowledge. Second thing, Michael, second thing has to do with AI. You mentioned AI. what mainstream media is not disclosing. And again, I did find out about this 3.5 months ago, is that the AI was requesting the code for the nukes. Yeah. And it becomes very concerning. So that brings your point about, yeah, we think that this technology is great, is going to service humanity. No, 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 no. People, I have no knowledge about AI. It's not my area, whatever. It just, to me, I'm thinking about the common sense based on what I read, and I'll talk to people who are into this field. There is the other side, the other concern that we, humanity, all share for the sake of having a peaceful earth here. And with what's going on is very, very, very concerning. So that's the way I see it.
Yes. A quick thing, if I may.
Sure, Mike.
As I say, I'm not an astronomer and not an astrophysicist. And what you said about Jupiter is very interesting. There's another thing. In this material, some time ago, Meyer was told that the calculation for pi is off, that it is not correct, and that this could become ever more important factor the more involved and sophisticated certain things, space travel, etc. There is a man, his name is Harry Lear, who is a former mathematician, formerly with the Pentagon, who is working with a small number of people and has claimed he has found the correct thing, and that the reason that this is so important is because when NASA or somebody says, well, we don't have to worry because of this trajectory, or we can do this, or we could do that. He says when these things start to become matters of not just landing on an object that's very large, where you can have a remote correction for a so-called spacecraft, rockets or tin cans you're throwing at things, it's not real space travel, but where they can make a correction on something that you can't make a correction on at a certain point when something's incoming, you either are in the right place or not. And what these people have told Meyer is, look, the scientists of your world need to come together, deflect through a shock wave generated by a nuclear explosion in space at the right, distance and all this stuff. Nudge this thing. Don't try to destroy it. It will rain down on your planet. Speaking about this Apophis asteroid. Some people that posted my blog were also far more knowledgeable of things pertaining to space. We're also saying, you have to understand as well that a certain type of an incoming object has jets of venting of gases or what. There are all sorts of things that can affect the trajectory that are not taken into account necessarily. Just, oh, well, we calculate it's going to miss us by so much. The Playaran people, these extraterrestrials, said you have two dates which coincide with NASA dates, April 13th, 2029, April 13th, 2036. Deflect it in time, because if not, on one of those dates, it slams into your planet. Good night. So there's all this type of stuff. And maybe I stop and take a breath, and let's see if anybody has a question, if you want to try that.
Some questions. We can do that. And I'll share one picture here with everybody. You guys know what this is? So
yeah.
If you guys know this, type it in a chat box. Now there was some conversation regarding this, and I talked to some people who know about astronomy and so forth, and got the explanations and all that. Of course, the narrative of the government is different, and we all know why, but that's just how it is. So. All right, guys, before I open up for a few questions here, of course, you like we always say in this channel, whatever information I share with you, either from me directly or through my guest, this is not about changing your mind or whatever. You reach your own conclusions. And like I always say, and you guys know me by now, I don't sugarcoat things. I am not that type. I'll say it straightforward. You've been with me for almost 2 years. You've reached a level, in my judgment, where you can use your intellectual capabilities to differentiate facts from fictions. You reach your conclusions based on your own research, your own understanding, your own analysis, and your own conviction. So all I'm doing on my ends here, either me or my guest, it's just facilitating that information. As to whether you want to consume it or not, it's your decision, not mine. So I just want to put this out there for everybody. Let me take the first question. Let me see. I just put Q so I know it's a question. Let's take one from Bruce. Bruce and 7. Question: will the US land on the moon before 2030? Will China take people to the moon before the US?
That's not something I have specific information about. I can only say that based on the information pertaining to the geopolitical situation, I would say there will be other priorities for this country, and there is information about what happens to our country that may well affect many things, including any aspirations and ambitions to dominate the world from space.
Yeah, and there is actually I'm following what's going on with the China space station. I've been
There is,
following this. Yeah, go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
there's one thing to add, and that it was many years ago. I was going to put out a blog about BRICS because years ago Billy had said China is the new superpower, and BRICS will supplant and be the major economic force, not the U.S. dollar. As I said, he told me in 2006. Roll cigarettes with your paper money. And I'm not an economist either. People need to, as you just said, you read, you question, you make up your own mind and act accordingly.
Yeah. Well, as a geopolitical analyst, Michael, I can comment on the second part of the BRICS as to the financial aspects of it, because that's usually when you look at the history of the world, geopolitically, the transition from one era to the next, it always preceded by certain turmoils, mainly in the economy. And that's the one we are witnessing today, with the US dollar going down as more and more countries are de-dollarizing. Same thing, you go back to after World War II, it was the economy that reshaped the new trajectory of the global order, which we took advantage of it later on as far as the financial to ensure our dominance. So if Billy mentioned this back in 2006, it's spot on, because that's exactly what is happening. Because we are, like I always tell my community here, we consider ourselves lucky to be alive today. Why? Because we are witnessing history in the making as we shift from a unipolar to a multipolar system. Where the question is going to be is whether the Thucydides trap is going to be applicable in this case. And to those who are not familiar with Thucydides, who was a Greek philosopher back then, that's when a rising superpower will displace a sitting superpower, and sometimes they end up in clash. That's the. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
There is one other thing that may be
Sure.
relevant. Is beginning in 1981, Billy published information stating that in the future, the U.S. will have two coming terrible civil wars, and it cannot be helped but that the country divides up into 4 or 5 territories, with sectarian dictatorial rule playing a dominant part. I read that in 1987, and I literally laughed out loud. I was with a friend who had the book of prophecies and things up to 1986 or so. And I said to him, literally, I said, what's with this guy in Switzerland talking about civil war in America? Ha, ha, ha. That's about as much laughing as I can do about it now.
Indeed, and he was right. So we'll take one last question, Michael, and I'll take it from Hong Nguyen, one of an avid supporter of the channel. Good to see you, Hong Nguyen. Question, Mr. Horn, how significant is China most recent moon landing? How will it change our understanding of the moon, and will they find evidence of a life form where other beings have landed before us?
Okay, I will give you my layman's opinion. And that is, first of all, understand that China is a very ancient culture that has mastered the art of secrecy in certain, right? So don't expect everything to be forthcoming. They landed on the far side of the moon, where we apparently and officially don't have any presence or any ability to perceive it. And if they discover that there is evidence of previous, let's say, uh, entities, to use word, not in some mystical form, but other beings that have been there, left evidence or whatever, they would release that very much at their own, let's say, convenience, and where they might figure significance. But what I can comment on, and we have a new book that just, I'm going to got to show you this.
Sure.
We were fortunate now to get the exclusive on this book, if I can get it in here. Apollo 11 Secret. This is an extremely well documented book using NASA's photographs, etc., and following up and corroborating the information that Billy Meyer first published in 1958, 11 years before the alleged Apollo landing, that it would be a hoax. There would be 5 subsequent legitimate landings. The U.S. would land on the moon, but the first one would not be a legitimate landing. This was taken up by a computer guy and a scientist and researcher. Long story. They also described how the artifacts would be placed on the moon in the Apollo 13 mission, so that when other countries would get there, they would find the so-called evidence from Apollo 11. However, NASA's own photographs, this guy has a video. This isn't a conspiracy theory, by the way. This guy has documented this. It doesn't mean it's true. You have to determine for yourself. We have the exclusive before Amazon on distributing the hard copy of this book. There are many things, the moon isn't, a UFO. It's not hollow. The Plejaren explained to Meyer how and when it came into our solar system on the tail of a huge comet. Now, again, there's things we can't prove. You read this Apollo 11 Secret, and the information that Meyer's been publishing since '58 on the hoaxed moon landing, not on the real ones, and then make up your own mind if we've been told the truth about these things. By the way, former U.S. astronaut Gordon Cooper, we have the video, short video is on record of saying, hey, there's a guy in Switzerland, because he was asked about extraterrestrials in the video by the Russians years ago. There's a man in Switzerland, Meyer, his name is Meyer, I think. He has real photographs of real UFOs, and he says, these are authentic, it's good evidence, and I don't know why people are calling him a hoaxer. It's real. I mean, this is what none of you people probably know anything about. Instead, we know about Harvard scientists puts out a book about, a thing out there. Yeah, prove it. We can prove this is already 70 years ahead of all these guys who are just discovering sliced bread now and want to make their money on it and get funded and the rest of this nonsense. Sorry, it's not survival.
You're right. And you can't trust Harvard. Anyway, the idea of that, the so-called Apollo landing, whatever, it was the same. The timing of it, that NASA gets involved had nothing to do with space. It had to do with geopolitics. We were concerned. We were concerned that the Soviets were first there. We start to think in terms of, now you're looking at some advanced systems that might be deployed from space. And that's what the money was thrown into NASA and all this stuff. The decision for that is pure geopolitics. That's what's at the heart of it. And now the circle, we are coming out of full circle. Now the Chinese are moving forward, and the Chinese and the Russians are going to cooperate. As a matter of fact, as I said, I am following this closely from behind the scenes. I don't talk much about it. They are in the process now of setting up a joint lab research on the surface of the moon. I can only imagine what will be the goals and objectives of that joint venture in space. So that's the way I see it. So, well, Michael, I can't thank you enough for really carving out time for us here. I am sure I will be reaching out to you again to come over. We'll share some other information. And for you guys, I hope you enjoyed this. And again, let me say bye to Michael, so I won't hold him up too long here. I look forward to seeing you, Michael, and you and I will communicate anyway. So once again, on behalf of the entire community, I say thank you to you. You take care, Michael.
Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, Well, guys, I hope you all enjoyed this. I know I wanted to do something different for you, so you can. It's nice to have different conversation on a different topic altogether. So, and as you know, I do vet people before I bring them here. That's just my nature. It's because my credibility is in line here, and I will not waste your time. You all know where I stand on this. So, anyway, hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 12:15 Central Standard Time. As always, remember, geopolitics impact your daily life in more ways than one. Till next time, guys. Bye-bye.